Smart people understand something that many learn only after years of unnecessary conflict. Explaining yourself does not always create understanding. Sometimes it creates more opportunities for people to question, distort, criticize, or manipulate what you say. There are situations where explanation is necessary, especially when responsibility, trust, or important decisions are involved. But there are also moments when continuing to explain yourself becomes a trap. The more you speak, the more material you provide for someone who has already decided what they want to believe. One of the clearest signs of maturity is understanding that not everyone deserves access to your explanations. This does not mean becoming arrogant, secretive, or unwilling to communicate. It means recognizing that explanation is valuable and should be given where it can create understanding, repair trust, or solve a real problem. Too often, people explain themselves because they feel uncomfortable with being misunderstood. They believe that if they can provide enough details, repeat their intentions, and defend every decision, eventually everyone will approve. But approval is not something you can guarantee through explanation. People interpret information through their own experiences, beliefs, emotions, and expectations. You can explain yourself perfectly, and someone may still choose to misunderstand you. Intelligent people recognize this early and stop wasting energy trying to control every interpretation. There is a major difference between someone who genuinely wants to understand you and someone who simply wants material to challenge you. A person who asks an honest question listens to the answer. They may disagree, but they are willing to consider what you have said. Someone who is committed to misunderstanding you behaves differently. They interrupt, twist your words, ignore important details, bring up unrelated accusations, or immediately create another objection after you answer the first one. In that situation, giving more information rarely solves the problem. It simply creates more material for the argument. This is why discernment matters. Before explaining yourself, ask whether the explanation will actually improve the situation. If the answer is yes, speak clearly. If the answer is no, consider whether silence or distance would be more useful. You do not need to defend every personal choice. If you decide to change your career, decline an invitation, end a relationship, protect your time, or pursue a different path, you can communicate respectfully without presenting your entire life as evidence for the decision. A simple explanation can be enough. You are allowed to say that something is not right for you without producing a 20-minute defense. You are allowed to change your priorities without convincing everyone that the change is objectively correct. You are allowed to make choices that others would not make. This becomes especially important when dealing with people who use explanations as opportunities for control. If you explain that you cannot do something, they may immediately negotiate. If you explain why you need space, they may challenge every reason. If you explain why you disagree, they may focus on one small detail and ignore the larger point. The more you explain, the more opportunities they have to argue. Sometimes the healthiest communication is brief, direct, and calm. I understand that you disagree, but this is my decision. I appreciate your concern, but I have considered it. I am not comfortable discussing that. These statements do not attack anyone. They simply establish a boundary around your decision. Another important lesson is that your explanation should match the importance of the situation. If you have harmed someone, an explanation may not be enough. Accountability is required. If you have made a serious mistake, hiding behind silence can be irresponsible, but accountability is different from endlessly defending yourself. You can admit what you did, apologize where appropriate, correct the mistake, and move forward. You do not need to create excuses to protect your image. In the same way, when someone genuinely deserves clarity, give it. Intelligence is not silence for its own sake. It is knowing when words create value and when they merely create noise. The goal is to stop explaining yourself out of fear. You do not need every person to approve of your choices before you are allowed to make them. Some people will misunderstand you. Some will disagree. Some will never change their opinion, no matter how clearly you speak. Accepting that reality gives you freedom. You can communicate with honesty while remaining comfortable with the fact that other people control their own interpretations. Your responsibility is to live according to your principles, take responsibility for your actions, and communicate when communication genuinely matters. Beyond that, you do not owe the world an endless defense of your existence. There is a point where words become less powerful than behavior. Smart people understand that anyone can describe themselves as disciplined, loyal, honest, confident, successful, or trustworthy, but descriptions mean very little when daily actions contradict them. Instead of constantly announcing who they are, they allow their behavior to create the evidence. This approach protects them from the exhausting need to convince everyone around them. If you tell people that you have changed but continue repeating the same habits, your explanation will eventually lose credibility. If you say that you value respect but repeatedly disrespect others, your words become empty. But when your actions consistently match your principles, you do not need to make constant announcements. People can observe the pattern for themselves. This is especially powerful when someone doubts you. Your first instinct may be to defend yourself and explain why they are wrong. You may want to list everything you have accomplished, every sacrifice you have made, and every reason they should recognize your effort. But the more you argue for your own value, the more you place your confidence in another person's judgment. A stronger approach is to continue doing the work. If someone believes you cannot succeed, let your progress answer them. If someone believes you are unreliable, become more consistent. If someone believes you lack discipline, build a routine that proves otherwise. You do not need to win the argument today when your behavior can create undeniable evidence over time. Actions also protect you from the problem of overpromising. Many people announce ambitious goals because they enjoy the emotional reward of imagining success. They tell everyone about the business they will build, the habits they will develop, the skills they will master, or the life they will create. The announcement produces excitement, but the difficult work has not yet begun. Smart people understand that talking about a goal and completing a goal are two very different experiences. They keep enough of the process private that their attention remains focused on execution. This does not mean that every goal should be hidden. Accountability can be useful. Sharing a goal with the right person can create support and structure, but there is a difference between strategic accountability and seeking applause. When you work primarily for recognition, you may lose motivation when nobody notices. When you work because the goal matters to you, your discipline can survive silence. Another reason actions speak louder than explanations is that consistency reveals character. Anyone can behave well for a day. Anyone can deliver a convincing speech. Anyone can apologize after being caught. But repeated behavior over months and years is much harder to fake. If someone wants to know whether you are trustworthy, they should observe whether you keep commitments. If they want to know whether you are disciplined, they should observe what you do when there is no immediate reward. If they want to know whether you have changed, they should look at the patterns of your life rather than the promises you make. This principle also applies to relationships. You do not have to repeatedly tell someone that you care about them if your actions consistently demonstrate consideration. You do not have to announce loyalty if you behave loyally when circumstances become difficult. You do not have to constantly demand respect if you treat yourself and others with dignity while maintaining clear boundaries. Your behavior becomes a quiet language that people eventually understand. There will still be people who refuse to acknowledge your growth. Some individuals are committed to their own interpretation of you, regardless of evidence. Do not let their refusal force you into endless self-defense. You cannot control another person's willingness to recognize reality. Continue building, continue learning, continue improving. Let time create a record that arguments cannot easily erase. The strongest response to doubt is often not a clever sentence, but consistent action. When your behavior repeatedly confirms your values, you become less dependent on explanations because the evidence exists outside your words. You are no longer asking people to believe who you say you are. You are giving them the opportunity to observe who you consistently choose to be. There are people who do not seek an explanation because they want understanding. They seek an explanation because they want an opening. They ask why you made a decision, why you refused a request, why you changed your priorities, why you stopped responding, or why you no longer behave as you once did. You answer honestly, believing that clarity will resolve the issue, but instead of accepting your answer, they challenge every detail. You explain one point and they question another. You clarify that point and they introduce a completely different accusation. Soon, the original issue has disappeared beneath layers of arguments. At that moment, the intelligent response is not to become louder. It is to recognize that the conversation may never have been about understanding in the first place. Some people have already chosen their conclusion before they ask their question. Their questions are simply tools for gathering material to support it. If you understand this pattern, you stop feeling obligated to win every disagreement. You realize that an argument can continue indefinitely if both sides are committed to proving themselves right. There is no requirement that you participate. Walking away from an argument is not automatically weakness. Sometimes it is evidence that you understand the value of your attention. Your time and mental energy are limited. Spending an hour trying to convince someone who has no interest in reconsidering their position can cost you far more than the argument is worth. This does not mean avoiding difficult conversations. Difficult conversations are sometimes necessary. If a relationship matters, if a mistake needs to be corrected, or if a decision affects other people, communication is important. But useful communication has a purpose. You should be able to identify what outcome you are trying to achieve. Are you trying to solve a problem, repair trust, exchange information, reach an agreement? If there is no realistic purpose beyond proving that you are right, the conversation may not deserve your energy. Smart people also recognize emotional traps. Someone may provoke you because they know that once you become angry, you will start talking more. You will reveal information, contradict yourself, exaggerate, or say something you later regret. They may not need to defeat your argument. They only need to make you lose control. The best defense is emotional discipline. Slow down. Do not answer immediately. Ask yourself whether responding will improve anything. Sometimes a short answer is enough. Sometimes no answer is necessary. If someone misrepresents what you said, you can correct the record once. After that, continuing to debate may simply create more opportunities for distortion. This is particularly important when dealing with people who constantly reinterpret your words. You may explain your intention, but they focus on your tone. You clarify your tone, and they question your motives. You explain your motives, and they bring up something from months ago. The conversation becomes impossible because the standard for acceptance keeps moving. At some point, you must recognize that the goal is not resolution. The goal is control or conflict. You cannot force someone to understand you. You can only decide how much access they have to your attention. Silence can therefore become a form of self-control. You are not admitting that they are right. You are deciding that their opinion does not require an endless response. There is also dignity in allowing people to believe what they choose. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Sometimes people will create stories about you that are completely inaccurate. If those stories have no meaningful impact on your life, chasing every rumor can make you more involved in the drama than the people spreading it. Let your consistent behavior create the long-term truth. The people who genuinely matter will judge you through experience, not through every accusation they hear. The ability to refuse unnecessary arguments is ultimately the ability to choose where your energy goes. You can spend it defending yourself, or you can spend it building the life you want. You can chase every misunderstanding, or you can continue becoming someone whose actions speak clearly. You can demand that everyone see you correctly, or you can accept that some people will never do so. Once you understand this, silence stops feeling like defeat. It becomes a deliberate choice to protect your attention, your emotional control, and your direction. Smart people understand that privacy is not the same as secrecy. Privacy is the deliberate decision to control access to information about your life, while secrecy often involves hiding something that may legitimately affect others. Knowing the difference gives you greater control over your relationships, your plans, and your peace of mind. You do not need to tell everyone what you are working on, how much you earn, what problems you are facing, who you are dating, what decisions you are considering, or what you hope to accomplish next. Some information becomes more valuable when it is shared carefully rather than constantly. The more people know about your plans, the more opinions you may receive. Some opinions will be useful, but many will be based on assumptions, insecurity, incomplete information, or personal preferences. If you allow every person to influence every decision, you can eventually lose contact with your own judgment. This is why intelligent people become selective about who receives access to their private world. They do not necessarily become distant or unfriendly. They simply understand that trust should be built through consistent behavior. Someone who has repeatedly demonstrated loyalty, honesty, discretion, and genuine concern may deserve deeper access. Someone who constantly gossips, mocks other people's vulnerabilities, or uses private information during arguments should probably receive less. You can remain polite with someone without telling them everything about yourself. This distinction protects you from unnecessary complications. Privacy also becomes important when you are building something new. Early plans are often fragile. You may still be learning, experimenting, and deciding what direction to take. If you announce every idea before it is developed, you expose yourself to opinions before you have enough evidence to evaluate them. Someone may discourage you because they cannot imagine the possibility. Someone else may criticize your approach without understanding the circumstances. Another person may become competitive because they see your ambition as a threat. None of these reactions necessarily means they are malicious, but you do not have to invite all of them into the earliest stages of your development. Work quietly enough to discover what is actually possible. Then share when sharing serves a purpose. Privacy also protects your emotional life. Not every feeling needs to become public information. You can experience uncertainty without announcing it to everyone. You can struggle without explaining every detail. You can work through a difficult situation with one trusted person instead of exposing your entire emotional state to a large audience. This does not mean suppressing emotions or refusing support. It means choosing the right people and the right moments. Vulnerability is powerful when it exists within trust. It becomes risky when it is offered indiscriminately. Smart people also know that explaining every private detail can create unnecessary obligations. Once you tell someone your plans, they may begin expecting updates. Once you reveal a goal, they may ask whether you succeeded. Once you share a personal conflict, they may feel entitled to know how it ended. Suddenly, your private life becomes a public project that other people feel entitled to monitor. You may find yourself explaining decisions simply because someone knows enough about the situation to ask. Keeping some things private prevents this unnecessary pressure. You are allowed to change your mind without announcing the entire process. You are allowed to reconsider a plan without explaining why. You are allowed to keep certain experiences entirely to yourself. This selective communication does not make you dishonest. It makes you intentional. There is also power in not giving people information they can use to create unnecessary conflict. If someone repeatedly twists your words, do not give them endless material. If someone uses your vulnerabilities against you, become more selective about what you reveal. If someone constantly compares themselves to you, there is no need to provide them with detailed information about your achievements, finances, or future plans. You are not obligated to satisfy every curiosity. Your life belongs to you. The more comfortable you become with privacy, the less you feel compelled to explain yourself. You stop seeking approval through disclosure. You stop believing that everyone needs to understand every decision. You begin choosing when to speak, what to share, and who has earned the right to know. That restraint does not weaken your relationships. With the right people, it can actually strengthen them because what you share becomes intentional and meaningful. You remain open where trust exists and private where boundaries are necessary. In a world that constantly encourages people to display everything, the ability to keep parts of your life protected becomes a quiet form of strength. One of the most difficult skills to develop is remaining calm when someone demands that you justify yourself. The demand can come in many forms. Someone may question your decision, challenge your priorities, accuse you of changing, or insist that you explain why you said no. The natural impulse is often to defend yourself immediately. You feel misunderstood, so you begin giving reasons. You explain what happened, why you made the choice, what you intended, and what you meant. But if you are not careful, the conversation can become a cycle in which every explanation creates another demand for justification. The person asks another question, you answer, they challenge the answer, and soon you are defending yourself against assumptions that were never yours to carry. Calmness breaks this cycle. It allows you to recognize that another person's demand for an explanation does not automatically create an obligation to provide one. This does not mean refusing accountability. If you have harmed someone, made a serious mistake, or violated an agreement, you should take responsibility. A mature person does not hide behind silence when an honest conversation is necessary. But there is a difference between accountability and submission to endless questioning. Accountability addresses what actually happened. Endless justification often attempts to make you prove that your decision is acceptable to someone else. You may have already considered the issue carefully, but they want you to keep defending it until they feel satisfied. You must understand that their satisfaction is not always within your control. Some people will not accept your decision because they disagree with it. No amount of additional explanation can change that. This is why calm communication is so effective. Instead of reacting emotionally, you can respond with a simple statement that reflects your position. You might say that you understand their perspective, but have made your decision. You might acknowledge their concern without changing your boundary. You might explain the relevant facts once and then refuse to continue the debate. The power comes from consistency. If you say something calmly and then immediately become defensive when challenged, your position becomes unstable. But if you remain composed, repeat the essential point when necessary, and avoid unnecessary details, the conversation loses its ability to pull you into emotional chaos. Calmness also prevents you from revealing more than you intended. When people feel pressured, they often speak too much. They reveal private information, criticize other people, contradict themselves, or make statements they later regret. A composed person gives themselves time. They do not believe every question deserves an immediate answer. Sometimes the most intelligent response is, I need time to think about that. Sometimes it is, I would rather not discuss that. Sometimes it is simply silence. These responses are not signs of weakness. They demonstrate that you control your own participation in the conversation. Another important principle is refusing to confuse discomfort with wrongdoing. You may feel uncomfortable when someone dislikes your decision, but discomfort does not automatically mean you have made the wrong choice. Setting a boundary can feel uncomfortable. Saying no can feel uncomfortable, Leaving an unhealthy situation can feel uncomfortable. Disappointing someone can feel uncomfortable. If you interpret every uncomfortable emotion as evidence that you should reverse your decision, you will constantly surrender your boundaries to other people's reactions. Smart people learn to tolerate that discomfort. They remain respectful without becoming submissive. They listen without automatically obeying. They explain when explanation is useful and remain silent when explanation becomes pointless. Over time, this changes how others interact with them. People learn that emotional pressure will not automatically make them change their decisions. They learn that questions will receive thoughtful answers, but manipulation will not receive unlimited access. Most importantly, the person themselves becomes more confident. They stop fearing every disagreement. They stop interpreting every challenge as a threat to their identity. They begin trusting their ability to make decisions and live with the consequences. Calmness is not the absence of strength. It is strength under control. When you can remain composed while someone demands that you justify yourself, you protect your judgment from emotional pressure. You no longer need to win every conversation because you understand that your life is not a debate. You can listen, communicate, take responsibility where necessary, and then move forward without carrying the burden of convincing everyone that your choices deserve permission. There is a particular kind of strength in knowing when silence is more useful than defense. Most people are trained to believe that whenever someone misunderstands them, they must immediately correct the misunderstanding. They feel compelled to explain their intentions, defend their character, and prove that the other person is wrong. But not every misunderstanding deserves your attention, and not every accusation deserves a response. Sometimes the more you defend yourself, the more important you make the accusation. By responding to every criticism, you can accidentally communicate that every opinion about you has authority over your emotional state. Intelligent people learn to choose their battles. They understand that silence is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is a deliberate decision to protect attention, dignity, and peace. This does not mean remaining silent when accountability is required. If you have harmed someone, honesty matters. If a serious misunderstanding could damage an important relationship, communication may be necessary. If your actions have consequences for other people, you should address them responsibly. Silence should never become an excuse to avoid responsibility. But outside those situations, there are many moments when defending yourself creates more problems than it solves. Someone may dislike your decision. Someone may gossip about you. Someone may create a false interpretation of your motives. Someone may criticize your priorities. You can spend hours correcting every statement, but there will always be another opinion waiting. If you make your peace dependent on correcting everyone, you will never be free. Silence allows you to step outside that cycle. It lets you decide that your energy is better invested elsewhere. There is also a psychological advantage to not reacting immediately. When you respond emotionally, you give the other person access to your impulses. They can provoke you, and you reveal exactly what bothers you. You may say things you later regret. You may provide private information that was never necessary to share. You may turn a minor disagreement into a major conflict. Silence creates a pause between the stimulus and your response. In that pause, you regain control. You can ask yourself whether the issue actually matters, whether the person deserves an explanation, and whether your response will improve the situation. If the answer is no, you can let the moment pass. This does not make you passive. It makes you selective. Another powerful aspect of silence is that time often reveals what arguments cannot. If someone claims that you are unreliable, you do not necessarily need to argue about your character. Continue keeping your commitments. If someone believes you cannot succeed, continue developing your skills. If someone thinks you have changed for the worse because you establish boundaries, continue living according to your values. Consistency creates a record. Eventually, people judge you through what they repeatedly experience rather than through what someone once claimed about you. Some people will still refuse to change their opinion. That is their choice. You do not need to make their agreement a requirement for your peace. Your life becomes lighter when you accept that some people will misunderstand you. You can be honest without being universally understood. You can be respectful without being universally liked. You can make strong decisions without receiving universal approval. The key is to remain responsible for your actions while refusing responsibility for every interpretation other people create. Silence also protects your future. Every unnecessary argument consumes time that could be used for work, relationships, learning, health, or personal growth. When you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you recover that time. You become more focused on creating evidence through your life rather than defending yourself through words. Eventually, you realize that your strongest defense is not a perfect explanation. It is a life that consistently reflects your values. Speak when your words can repair, clarify, or create something meaningful. Remain silent when speaking would only feed conflict. Take responsibility when you are wrong. Stand firm when you are right. And understand that you do not need to answer every voice that calls your name. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to continue living well without stopping to prove yourself.